welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. We are here to review Mickey 17, the new film by Bong Joon-ho, the Korean director who brought us Parasite, and for whom was Parasite not their movie of the year? Well, maybe some it wasn't. But for us, it was an absolutely sensational movie. It was clever, it was nuanced, it was dark, it was twisted. So much wasn't lost in translation with that film, if you know what I mean. It was jam-packed with some sensationally kind of, weighty, thought-provoking performances. Who was the parasite? Who was the parasite? Who was living off who and all that kind of stuff. Mickey 17 is his latest film. It's a science fiction black comedy. It stars Robert Pattinson. And I'm going to say from the get-go, to give you a little bit of a tease, this wasn't quite what I was expecting. And it certainly wasn't what I felt I was getting from the two trailers that we reacted to. What I was surprised by this film was this is a film that, if you watch the trailer and if you read the description and if you actually describe it, this is a film that should be equally laden in meaning and thought-provoking ideas, questions of existence, questions of mortality, questions of life expectancy, musings on death, ideas of colonization, what it means to settle alien territory or land, the environment, climate change, the cosmos, you name it. I mean, this film potentially has all of that as its playing field within which to run around and go mad. But I have to say that this film, Mickey 17, unlike Parasite, was neither nuanced nor surprising in any of the right ways. It was surprising, but not in the ways that I was hoping it would be. Let's talk about its star, the main star, Robert Pattinson. Curious star. He's the kind of star or actor who almost happens to have found himself performing. He almost seems perplexed in his own performances sometimes, that he himself is famous or is an actor or is actually as popular as he is or as in demand as he's become. I've liked him. I think he is an acquired taste. I liked him very much in The Lighthouse. I liked him very much in The Batman. Obviously, he was in all those vampire films from many years ago. But I think he is an acquired taste. He's one of those performers who, once he gets going in a role, I find myself almost wincing slightly, thinking this could go terribly wrong. And I'm going to have to say from the off with this, it was a slight nagging concern watching the trailers. From the off, I found his tremulous, slightly stupid, almost goofy voice a little bit eggy and a little bit kind of grating from the get-go. I mean, Mickey 17, which is the main character of this, really. We've got two Robert Pattinsons. We've got Mickey 17 and then we've got Mickey 18 coming in hot off his heels. The idea is that basically he's elected to be repeatedly printed digitally, biologically printed, and he's used for sort of scientific endeavors, scientific experiments. He's used and he's tested on, he's put into space. He tests the atmosphere of planets and stuff like that. And then when he dies, they pump all this kind of stuff into this printer, this cosmic printer, and they print out a new iteration of him. Not an entirely new idea. Sam Rockwell, I think in the sci-fi moon mission film called Moon, I think he too finds out or discovers that he is just a reiteration of himself that's out there as a sort of corporate quality. And so there's that in this, which, if you think about it, that's also been in films like Alien and Blade Runner. The idea of corporation, the idea of the corporate kind of demand, the need for information in order to kind of make money or to sustain human life somewhere. And so what we have in this is we pick up the story really with Mickey 17, who, due to a range of kind of comedic, slightly kind of confusing and unexpected sort of gaffes, he ends up being a multiple. He ends up being alive and existing alongside his number 18 iteration, because actually he hasn't fully died, Mickey 17, and so Mickey 18 lands, and you've seen it in the trailer. There's that wonderful moment where they both sit up together and go, "Ah, we're both alive, we're multiple." So they're trapped in space. We've got a spaceship full of settlers. We have an indigenous species on a planet, an ice-like planet, which is where the whole film starts. Very much reminding me of Hoth, was it, in The Empire Strikes Back? Frosty, cold. Everything about this was there to like for me. I love sci-fi. I love lost in spaceness. I love all that stuff, and exactly exploring and finding stuff out about a new planet. Brilliant. And so, what with Robert Pattinson's jaunty, jocular, sort of a bit simple, kind of silly kind of delivery, a bit stupid, a bit naive, goofy, as I said. This kind of moved along with a sort of catch-22 sensibility. Do you remember the film way back with Alan Arkin, was it? And then there was the series, obviously, with George Clooney. Catch-22, that sort of... It has a very Catch-22 feel to it. Sort of a kind of... It even had a sort of Fallout sensibility, the series on Prime, based on the computer game. Sort of pastiche, kind of comedic, slightly kind of sort of pantomime almost. And I think for me that was one of the problems with this. The comedy, it was a curious kind of comedy. It was neither original comedy, it wasn't particularly comedic. I think this is a film that from the get-go feels like it's much smarter than it is. I think this film feels it's riffing on really deep and meaningful kind of topics and thoughts, and it just really isn't. There's very little that's surprising about this film. So it has this sort of Catch-22 jaunty sensibility, and yet at the heart of it, like there is with Catch-22, there's a sort of darkness, which is essentially that Mickey 17, or Mickey, keeps repeatedly dying. And for saying this is a film about a character who is the 17th iteration of himself and then the 18th iteration of himself, this film really doesn't go deep into, and I suppose tonally it wouldn't, because it's trying to do this comedy thing. It didn't even really riff on or explore or take us to, even in a humorous fashion, into the depths of what it means to repeatedly die or die in different ways. It had a very jaunty voiceover device. I found Robert Pattinson's voiceover execrable. Is that the word? Execrable. I found it just cringy. I found it cringy. I found it unsuccessful in what it was endeavouring to do. It just alienated and it kind of aggravated me. Ironically, when we get to the point of the film where his multiple, Mickey 18, is like alive with him, and Mickey 18 is a much more cynical, dark, you could say evil, kind of, malevolent version of Mickey. I found him infinitely more, if not believable. I kind of preferred his performance as the darker Mickey. I found the naive, stupid Mickey 17, I just wanted to slap him, and I just thought he was stupid. And I don't actually think Robert Pattinson wasn't necessarily good. I just don't think he was very well directed. And I do have a horrible feeling that a huge amount of what happens in this film is lost in translation, because it's the director from South Korea is directing in English, and I just think something didn't translate. Something is lost in translation with this film. So on this ship, you've got Mickey 17. He's the only, there was no real exploration of why. I didn't really feel like I got the answer as to why he was the one that was the multiple. Why didn't they have more multiples? Why weren't there other people that were doing the same thing? He was essentially their resident guinea pig who was repeatedly sent out and tested and prodded. They had lots of scenes where scientists were so cursory about the whole sort of thing, where, they'd be printing a new version of Mickey, and like you do with paper coming out of a paper printer, it would all just fall on the floor, and then you'd jump up and you'd pick him up and all that kind of stuff. That didn't kind of work for me either. The community, the civilization, the people, the humans on this ship, a weird community that at times felt like sort of Whoville from The Grinch. They, again, all of them were sort of archetypes and stereotypes and very two-dimensional. And then at the sort of twee and very compliant and very sort of, it's all jolly hockey sticks and all that kind of stuff. And then we got to meet the bosses. And the bosses are Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette, or Mark Ruffalo is, in a sense, channeling his inner Trump. But I found that even his inner Trump was a little bit overbearing. Whereas I thought Mark Ruffalo did a good job in the film like Poor Things, being a sort of gurning, surreal nutcase. In this, he was trying too hard, and I think they put too large a set of teeth in his head. And he was too consciously, I think, trying to kind of give his version, if you like, or his riff on Trump in space. It massively misfired. And Toni Collette, alongside him as the sort of, if you like, the first lady or his partner, I think she ended up sort of leaning very much on sort of extraordinarily expressive facial gestures and facial expressions. And I just found the two of them were just incredibly crass in their comedy. It was wincingly bad. And so slowly I went from kind of thinking, yeah, I'm invested in this as an idea. The problem with any sci-fi is, I know it's a comedy, it's meant to be a comedy, and as I understand it, I haven't seen a lot of Bong Joon-ho's other kind of slightly more comedic kind of films. It's a comedy that just didn't work for me. I understand that, the two, even the villains, Toni Collette and Mark Ruffalo, they were kind of riffing on a sort of anime tradition of villainy, which, okay, I didn't get, but it just didn't work for me either. And so slowly the entire sort of concept for the film just started to fall apart at the edges. None of it was believable. Most of it was overdone or overblown or overcooked. As I said before, it wasn't clever, it wasn't thought-provoking, and yet there were lots of things that could have been thought-provoking, albeit in a comedic manner. I know it's a comedy, I get it, it's a comedy, but even in comedy, you can tickle at the edges of things in a bit more of a meaningful fashion. It veered at times, like a classic example, a comedy with a serious message. Dr. Strangelove, that classic Stanley Kubrick film. There were moments in this where it felt like a poor imitation of Dr. Strangelove, and all of the kind of gurning extremities of leaders and decisions being made by Mark Ruffalo and his sort of lieutenants. Just, it felt very, very clumsy. Interestingly, one of the more successful aspects, I think, of the film was the planet onto which they were kind of, landing, and they were going to settle and establish a civilization, a community. And you have these strange sort of grub-like creatures. I mean, they look like the grubs that you get in the outback in Australia. And there's a great mummy grub, and right at the beginning of the film, when you had the pre-title sequence where Robert Pattinson looked like he was going to be eaten by one of these things, we discover that actually these creatures are incredibly not only sentient, but they're also incredibly thoughtful and considerate, even empathetic. They actually, spoiler alert, they weren't wanting to kill Robert Pattinson or Mickey 17, they were wanting to rescue him. And then we have a moment later in the film where Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 are thrown onto the ice of the planet, and they're told to go out and communicate with these creatures, and then Mark Ruffalo decides he wants to conquer these creatures. Even the sense of settlement, which is, crikey almighty, if you look at America's past and you look at the current situation in the Middle East, incredibly sort of topical subject matter, the removal of the killing of other life forms, or the removal of indigenous beasts. Again, it was all too pantomime. It was too pantomime. And here's the thing, if you're playing something for comedy, even if it's extreme comedy, say something like Tropic Thunder, you've got to play it for truth. You've got to play it in a truthful way, even if it's ludicrous. And this is where my problem with this film resides. Nearly all of the performance, perhaps with the slight exception of Naomi Ackie, all of the performances in this film weren't truthful. They were performances, and you could argue, what's the point? Of course they're performances, they're actors. But my point is that they kind of felt too surface, and so they became types, and so it didn't go deep, and so which creates a problem in terms of believing and investing in this community on this spaceship and their mission and the way in which they live their lives and what's happening to Mickey 17. The irony of it all is there was much more believability around just the grubs and their own sort of their own microclimate and the ways in which they kind of communicate with each other. But even they didn't deliver on their promise. They seemed to sort of be, it was suggested that they were cleverer than we thought at one point, but then they weren't clever enough to kind of sort their shit out, which was weird. So in a sense, even the best bits sort of pivoted around the grubby aliens. But even they lost their sort of believability, as they didn't really pose a threat, nor did they offer any big revelation of any form in the film. You've got that weird thing that, given that Robert Pattinson keeps coming back as a new Mickey all the time, and albeit this film pretty much sits with Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 for huge swathes of it, you haven't even got the jeopardy really around him dying. His previous iterations, or the ways in which he has his life ended, and sort of how we got to Mickey 17, which was kind of done in a very sort of truncated montage, also removed the idea of jeopardy. I didn't really feel any jeopardy. And I also felt that actually Mickey 17, the version, Mickey 17 version of that Robert Pattinson played, was so stupid. He was so fucking stupid. I mean, there was a particular scene, I mean, he's meant to be, but he was just stupid to the point of nothing happening around him managed to be that dramatic because nothing really landed on him. He didn't really see the implications or feel the implications of what was going to happen to him in a way that actually Mickey 18 did. And so I found Mickey 18 more interesting in a way to watch than Mickey 17. Stephen Yeun, he's good, but he kind of just comes in at the side. He kind of reminded me at times of Robert De Niro's plumber, was he? A sort of cosmic plumber in that film Brazil. He just sort of kind of wandered in. It just, all the sum of its parts didn't really pull together. I mean, there were certain occasions when it was so camp, but not in a good way, that I was almost expecting Austin Powers to step out at some point and go, ooh, you know, all that kind of stuff. Could this be a lost in translation problem? Possibly. But I found this film so bad, it made me even doubt the expertise and brilliance of Parasite. And that's the last thing I wanted to happen when I went to see this film. You know, Parasite is a good film, don't get me wrong, but this was so toe-curlingly awful. There was nothing real in it. And again, as I say, of course none of it's real. It's a sci-fi lunacy. But you've got to have some reality baked into even the lunacy that they're selling us. And none of it was sold well. Toni Collette became a caricature of herself. She was just too Machiavellian. She was so clearly the woman behind the man and controlling Mark Ruffalo's Trumpian impersonator. He's not like Trump, but, you know, he's sort of stupid and ridiculous. We had so many set pieces and scenes that were just sort of handled in a kind of garish and sort of poorly conceived way, like the moment where they had a slice of rock and then they shoot and then a grub comes out and it just felt amateur. It was, at times, it was like watching a really badly staged amateur dramatics show of a sci-fi musical. Shockingly bad. This film was a massive disappointment. There was no consequences. There were no consequences to the fact that Robert Pattinson's character was disposable, and yet the film sets its stall as being about that, and it wasn't really about that. This film didn't know what it was about. It literally had so many possible fractured areas into which it could have gone, and it ended up going into none of them in any sufficient detail. It wanted to hit too many different things. It was too, you could argue, being kind, you could say it was too ambitious, but for me, this was a mess.